Okay, so what I'm going to show you here is how to collect all the triggers for every scan that you have, just to see if something's a little off. So like if you have too many triggers, too little triggers, they're not in the right time. So what we're first going to do is we're going to open up this NIRS preprocessing, and you can maybe just add it to your path. So I'm just going to do selected folders and subfolders. I always just find that kind of easy. And what we're going to do is go into this helper script folder, and we're going to open up trigger check. So this is a function. So what you could do if you want, which is like a little bit annoying, but you can copy that function and you can write all this stuff in. What's going to be annoying is if you have to write in the whole raw directory, because you're going to be like C users blah 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 blah. So I don't really recommend that. What you can do, which is like a little shortcut, and I like to do, is go into my practice process and just kind of like steal some of these things that you need and put them in your workspace. So like my data prefix, I need to know if it's a hyperscan, which means did you scan multiple people at once? So yes or no. I have 5 scans. My ID length is 4, as you can see, because it's IPC, and then there's also an underscore, so that's 4. And then, so let's come over here. What else do I need? I need to know how many scans I have. So it's 5. I'm just going to copy this and then put it in. So I have 5 scans. This is going to really depend on your study. Alright, so I have all the variables except for raw directory, which I can just indicate over here. So I'll evaluate that. I like to do a uget directory. I find it easy, but you can also just write out your directory if you're doing this a lot. So I'm going to select it. Oops, wrong one. It's in my external hard drive. So all my data is right here, as you can see. I'm going to select that. So just select the folder that has all of your data. All right. So now we're ready to run this trigger check. So a different way to do this also, like if you just want to do this like a bunch of times for some reason, would be to just kind of steal some of these variables. I like to just put it in like a script. This is like a very lazy way of doing this. You could even make a script to like run this a bunch of times. Sorry, let's do both of these. What else was in here? And your raw directory, right? Yeah. Again, you could write out your raw directory if you're going to be running this a bunch of times, which you'll see why later. Then you could even take this and you could take the function and be like, great, now I just have all my inputs ready. And I can like run the function after I like change all these inputs up here. All right, so I've already saved them, so we don't have to worry about that. Or, well, let's just see what that would look like actually. So let's say I did it like this. You can literally just highlight all this, right? Because it's gonna go, oh, get the directory. All right, that's my directory. I'm gonna select that. And then what it's first gonna do when it runs that function is it's gonna ask me how to like collect the data, just like our pre-processing. So I used a NIRS Sport too, or if you just have like a NIRS file, and hit OK. And now it's literally just going to go through every single scan, and it's pretty quick because all it's doing is just going through every single scan and then looking for the triggers. And it's collecting those triggers, and then it's going to put it into a structure so I can review those triggers. And we'll see that in a second. All right, done. So it's this trigger info structure right here. And then also it saves it to that raw directory. So wherever you have all that data, so let's scroll down here, it's also going to save it down here. So just in case if you like clear it from your workspace, it's already saved. All right, so what does that look like? So let's open up that trigger info. So it's basically, it collects the scan name for you as well, so you know which scan it aligns with. It then tells you, let's say if it's a hyperscan, it's going to tell you what dyad it's aligning with. So for mine, it's just going to be 2 columns because I have 2 subjects for each dyad. So it's like, oh yeah, dyad 1, 2, 3, etc. It's also going to tell you the subject number. So here it's like IPC 101 and 301, so that's my subject 1 and 2. And the reason for this, and I'll show you, I'm just going to move this over here, is because you have all these triggers. So it's going to be a 3D structure in which that third page is your subjects. So for right now, we're looking at the first dimension, or the first page of my third dimension, and it's just one column because everybody has one trigger, and that just tells me where the start of that like interest is. So for this, it's conversation, so it's like, oh, okay, that's the beginning of the conversation. Just trim off anything before it. So this looks great. And I can scroll down and I'm like, oh great, everybody has one trigger. You'll notice some people don't though. So some of it's like 0. So that might be problematic for me. Or possibly they just started it right as they were leaving. This is something you're gonna have to know. But I'm pretty happy with this. I know that actually for those, they did just start it like right as they were leaving. They forgot to put the trigger in. So I'm like, oh great. For this conversation, I don't need to change anything. It looks great. Now I come over here and I'm like, wait, this one, I have 69 dyads, but there's 4 columns. So what this is telling me right here, sorry, I just like to compare, is that I have, for some of these subjects, multiple triggers, which is not good. So it's like you can see here, it was triggered at 509, 511, and 512, and that's in frames. So what happened is somebody got a little trigger happy, or maybe they had to re-trigger because they didn't trigger it at the right time. And that's not great for pre-processing, because when I pre-process I go, oh, just choose the first trigger or the last trigger, but maybe for this one I want like the middle trigger, you know? I mean, realistically for this I want just the last trigger. But yeah, you can notate, you're like, okay, some of these have more triggers than I wanted, like, and that's not good. I need to change that. So what you can do is just take note of which ones you want to change. So specifically, I know that I want to change this one because, as you can tell, there's a trigger for some reason like really late in the game. So what I want to do is just change so that I no longer have this one. So how can I do that? All right, well, there is a script for this. So what you want to know is like which ones you want to change. So you can actually, you could like keep opening this, you could make a note for all the ones you want to change. It's kind of annoying, I know. But let's say I just want to change one of them for now, and it's going to be this one right here. So if you remember, this is scan 2. This is subject 1, as it's on that first page of the third dimension. And then it is, I have 69 dyads, so this is 67. So this is dyad 67, subject 1, scan 2. So just, I'm saying this because we're going to actually input this into a different script. So what is that script? Well, it is the trigger change manual. And so you're only going to change the inputs. So just make sure that your inputs align with whatever your study inputs are. So mine are already in here. Data prefix is IPC, ID length is 4, it's a hyperscan, I have 5 scans, and then I'll just choose wherever I have it. And if you remember, we want to change group 67 or dyad 67. I want to make it for subject 1, and then it's going to be for scan 2, right? Because that's the trigger that I want to delete. So once you have all your inputs correct, you can just run this. So it's like, all right, where's your data? Where do you have your data stored? So it's up to you. I select that. How'd you collect it? NIRS port 2, and it gives you this little pop-up. But first, what you want to do is actually look down at your command window and see if you've selected the right one. So I did. It tells me that I found 2 triggers, which is 1 too many because I only want 1 trigger. And then it tells me the frame. Oops! It tells me the frame in which the length of the scan, if it were to trim, based off of this last trigger, I believe. And then it also tells me the frames in which each trigger is. So I have 2 triggers, one at 1421 and then another at 6443. So what I actually want to do is get rid of that 6443. I want to delete it and just have 1421. So over here in this little pop-up, which is triggers to change, it asks me, do you want to delete triggers? Do you want to add triggers? Or do you want to just change some of these? So maybe you want 2 triggers, but these aren't actually the correct frames. So what I want to do is just delete. So I'm going to say yes to delete and then just no to these 2. If you want to change, what it's going to do is actually delete and then add it in a new time. So if you ever think you want to delete and add, it's actually just easier if you just do change. So like if I want to keep 2 but just change the times, just choose change. Alright, but what I want to do is delete. So I'm just going to say, yes, I want to delete one of these triggers. Alright, so it's like, which one do you want to delete? So I want to delete just that last one, so I'm going to put 2. If I was deleting more than one, I would make sure that it's going in a list. So let's say that I have like 4 triggers, and I want to delete the first trigger and the third trigger. I want to do 1, 3. It would be the same also if I wanted to delete the first, second, and third. 1, 2, 3. Always make sure it's in a list format. But for today, we're just going to save the second one. Just want to delete that second trigger. And it's like, all right, great. Now you just have 1 trigger. It's at frame 1421. Do you want to save this to the .NIRS file? So it's going to save your triggers to the .NIRS file so that now you only have 1 trigger for this dyad and scan. So if I do, I say, yeah, that's exactly where I want the trigger, save it. And so now it's just saving it. I know that because it says it's busy. And then it kind of just like outputs everything. But how do I know that it no longer looks like this? Well, what I can do is, I'm just going to clear this all up a bit, is run that trigger check again. So let's check it out. Let's rerun it. So again, it's just going to ask me where my data is, how I collected it, and then it's just going to run through it again. So we're running through all those scans again, just to look at where all the triggers that exist are. And the difference I should see here is for that dyad 67, subject 1 in scan 2. So let's just check and see if it's different. So scan 2, so that's going to be my neutral scan. Let's scroll down to, so we're going to stay in subject 1, all the way to the bottom, and yeah, it's changed because we don't have that second trigger. So this is 67. So perfect, wonderful. So now if I were to pre-process, it's not even going to recognize that there was ever a second trigger. It's only going to be based off of this first trigger. And so you can do that, unfortunately, if you have a lot to change, kind of like what you see here, you'll have to do it like 1 by 1. I'm working on updating a script so that like maybe you can do a bit more of like a batch change, but that takes some time. So what could you do in the meantime if you have like a ton of triggers to change and it's not just like a few here and there? What you can do is you can just make a spreadsheet instead. So if you ever go into how it actually trims, which when you're pre-processing, so let's take a look at that for a second. So usually you can do run NIRS preproc or pre-processing fNIRS, but I'm just going to show you. It asks you a very specific question, which is how do you want to trim your data? So if you don't want to trim your data, you can just say don't trim it, don't worry about it. You can trim it based off of the first trigger, so it gets rid of everything before that first trigger. You could trim it based on the last trigger. So let's say in your scans, some people got trigger happy, but it's always the last trigger that you want to base it off of. You technically don't need to change anything. So for example, if I know that this last trigger here is always where I want to trim it, I could say trim it based off the last trigger, and so for every person, it's just going to go trim here, 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 and then for this person, it's going to be here, because that's their last trigger, whereas these are their last triggers. So that would be fine. Even if you have, like, multiple triggers, like, as long as you know the last trigger is always where you want to trim, that's fine. However, in this case, it's like 114 is very different from 4825. So it's like, do I actually want to trim that late? No, that would be bad, right? I want to instead trim at 114, but for this person I want to trim at 703. So I can't say first trigger or last trigger because it's different for each specific person. So in that case, I might want to instead do a spreadsheet. So if I say trim based off of the spreadsheet, it's going to ignore my triggers all together in the NIRS file, and instead it's going to be based off of whatever is in my spreadsheet. So what does that mean? Well, let's see. I have a spreadsheet already made based off of this data here, and I called it trim times. You can call it whatever you want. It's going to make you select it. But what you can do is you can use this trigger info here, and you can actually just make a spreadsheet out of it. So let me show you. All right. So you can like copy paste if you want from this. It could be a little hard with the structure, so you might have to like change the structure up. But like here, like you could like literally if it's perfect, you can copy it really easy. And so you can tell right here. So this is subject 1. It says, okay, this is the trigger I want to trim at, right? Which is true for subject 1. Subject 2 is actually right here. So if you have a single scan, you'll only need it for each scan. If you have, let's say, 2 subjects and you're hyperscanning, you're going to need to be in this format. So it's going to be like each scan, subject 1, each scan, subject 2. If you have 3, it would be subject 3, just like that. I only have 2 subjects though. So you'll notice here it says NA, and that's because actually we didn't really have a participant there. But you'll notice here, this is subject 2, 246, subject 3, 25. So this is what your CSV would look like for trimming. All right, but I'm showing you good ones, so let's look at the neutral, where we got too many triggers. So here you can tell I have like 503. Again, the 0 is because there wasn't a neutral conversation. But 503, 715, 2107. So here you'll see I only have 512. So instead of going in and changing it for every .NIRS, what I did is I just copy pasted it into here, and I actually manually selected the trigger that I knew I needed. So I was like, all right, I need 512. And it's just the same on down. So like you can see here, there's like the 500, and then I manually selected 578, and so on and so on. So this is like, it's kind of annoying, but like it's actually pretty quick when you do this, because like most of it's just copy pasting, and then just you have to know ahead of time. So like here for this one, I knew I needed it to be 114, so I have 114. So that's just like kind of a quick / manual way to like not have to go into every single .NIRS file. And if you're hyperscanning, it's really nice if you're like truly hyperscanning. So this was not a true hyperscan. Instead, we were scanning at the same time, but one in LA, one in Dallas. So it's different trigger times. But if you're truly hyperscanning, you can literally just, and you can only put one trigger. Instead, what you can do is like, you can just copy this and then paste it in for subject 2. Because you can only get that trigger in one person's scan. But this is like a quick way to just take all that one person scan and just double it. And now it's just going to trim for subject 1 and 2 at the exact same frame. Hopefully that makes sense. So yeah, just make sure though that it's in that structure. So they'll scan 1, 2, 3, 4 for subject 1, and then 2, 3, 4, subject 2, and so on. All right. I'm not going to save anything here. Let's click out of that. So hopefully that makes sense. Just keep in mind, so the trigger check, you're not changing anything. You're just checking where the existing triggers are based on that .NIRS file. And then if you want to change it, you want to use that trigger change manual, and it will change it for that .NIRS file. So if you want to check it again, use the trigger check again. And then, yeah, when you pre-process anything you've changed, it will be based off of the changes. All right,